Good afternoon, I'm Fran Heathcote, I'm the President of PCS, I'm a member of the People's Assembly Coordinating Committee. Really proud to chair this rally today, coming as it does immediately before the TUC begins this afternoon. Over the next hour or so, we're going to hear from some of the best in the movement about how we can campaign together to fight back against this rotten government, how we can work together to build a movement of opposition to what they're doing, and how we stand together and articulate not just what we don't want, but how we can develop a real alternative, a socialist alternative. I'm going to keep my comments really short to give you as much chance as possible to hear from our excellent lineup of speakers. In my union, PCS, we've always gone to the TUC and argued for a joined up, coordinated response to the attacks that we face, recognising that we cannot allow the Tories to isolate and divide us, and that a coordinated response is now an absolute necessity. So I'm really proud to introduce our first speaker, our General Secretary, Mark Sawatka from PCS. Over to you, Mark.
Well, good afternoon, Fran, and welcome to everyone. Very proud to be able to speak at this rally. And can I say on behalf of PCS that given we believe central to the resistance of all the attacks coming from government will be the 6 million strong organised trade union movement, we very much welcome this rally on the eve of the Congress, and we hope very much this can become an annual event. Look, at this Congress, and I make no apologies for focusing on the trade union issues given the TUC starts today, we're going to be discussing some of the key issues, the attacks on pay and our living standards. For PCS members this year, because of government policy, our members will on average have a pay cut of 5.25% in real terms of their living standards. We have attacks on our pensions, we have fire and rehire, we have massive cuts, we have a climate emergency, we have a blight of racism in our society, inequality, and we're all trying to recover after the pandemic. At this Congress, we will discuss motions dealing with all of those things, including the call for a 4-day week and for a very different type of emphasis on the running of our economy. But our message from PCS at this rally is that motions are never enough. We will carry all the resolutions at the Congress, but that is not enough. Motions at a conference do not mean the struggle we need to see is going to happen. So I want to turn my remarks to turning the clock back. Exactly 10 years ago today, we were on the eve of a TUC conference. At that TUC conference, which was called weeks after, 4 unions, PCS, the NUT, the Association of Teachers and Lecturers, and the UCU, had just had a massive pension strike. We had a situation where we had a Tory-led government, we had a weak Labour Party in opposition, exactly the same circumstances, it seems to me, as we have now. Yet the lead taken by those bold 4 unions led in a matter of months to the biggest strike in Britain we had seen in generations. 2 million people on strike, 29 unions fighting for justice on pay. And we have to say to ourselves now that we need to recreate those conditions. The best way to defeat the government is the trade union movement, backed up by campaigners in every community across the country, is the way to mobilise people to stop the government's attacks. They won't be stopped in Parliament. They certainly won't be stopped in Parliament with an opposition at the moment, sadly, is ineffective. They will be stopped in our communities by campaigns, by demonstrations, and by industrial action. So my finishing point is this, Fran. In my union, we have seen how brave and inspirational workers can be when they take industrial action. Our members at DVLA in Swansea now been on strike for 6 months over COVID safety. We have members on strike in the Royal Parks, in ISS, private contractor at Bay. They are inspirational and we will back them and we believe they can win. But imagine how we could all win if all unions organised in the workplace worked together and delivered the type of action we saw 10 years ago today. Solidarity from PCS, let's unite and fight together. That's the way to win. Thanks very much.
Okay, thanks so much, Mark. And I'm really pleased now to introduce Shami Chakrabarti, member of the House of Lords, barrister and human rights activist. Really glad you could join us, Shami. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Fran. It's an absolute joy to be here for the People's Assembly and a privilege to follow Mark. So this is the worst government that I can remember, and I don't say that lightly. I grew up under Thatcher. And why do I say that? Because in this terrible pandemic, a pandemic that has been a parable for everything that's wrong with the world, that has exaggerated and amplified every inequality in the world. We were unfortunate to find ourselves under a far-right government. And again, I don't say that lightly. I say it because it has all the hallmarks of a government of that flavour. Not a traditional conservative government, but a far-right government. Why? On the one hand, there is freedom for the super wealthy and their corrupt friends. On that same hand, there is all the kind of widening of inequality and infliction of poverty that you've just heard about from Mark. But on the other hand, we have authoritarian tactics and oppression of ordinary people and every civil liberty that's been hard won over so many years. And I just want to spend my remaining minute or so talking about this terrible police bill that is coming back to Parliament next week, because this police bill, on the one hand, is explicitly racist against our Gypsy, Roma and traveller communities. I've rarely seen a piece of legislation so meticulously designed to single out a tiny vulnerable minority for criminalisation and abuse. And on the other hand, of course, we see an entrenchment of the worst policing against peaceful dissent. We're going to see a criminalisation of protests just for making a noise or an impact. Well, friends, that is the whole point of protest. So I leave you with this thought: sometimes unhappily, to defend precious liberties, including the right to protest on the streets, we have to protest on the streets. It's a virtuous circle, and the magic word has already been mentioned by Mark in his opening remarks. The magic word that's come back into fashion, that's translatable into every language on earth. Christians call it fellowship, and Muslims call it ummah. Some African peoples call it Ubuntu. That magic word is solidarity. It describes the destination of the place we're heading for, but also the means of transport. So that's what we share together today. That's what I wish you. Friends, solidarity, solidarity.
Thanks so much, Shami. And you know, that really is the theme of this whole event, isn't it, in terms of the solidarity we bring to each other and across the movement. So thank you for that. Okay, I'm really pleased to welcome our next speaker. That's Lindsay German from Stop the War. And Lindsay, no doubt, will outline some of the big campaign issues that we're facing. So over to you, Lindsay.
Thanks very much, Fran, and thanks to the People's Assembly for inviting me. I think this is such an important meeting because we face so many challenges. I want to talk briefly about how this affects us in terms of war and peace and the associated things with it. We've just had the withdrawal from Afghanistan after 20 years of war, a war that we said 20 years ago, and the trade union movement has been very good, particularly some of the trade union leaders represented here today have been very good in always opposing these wars. We said they would achieve nothing. They would not make the world a more peaceful place. They would not help the people of those countries like Afghanistan. They would not end terrorism, which is what's supposed to be their intention. I think 20 years on, we can see the way in which this remains the case. And yet, while we can see it, our governments don't. Boris Johnson has committed an increase above inflation to defence spending, to more on the military, to more spending that go into the pockets of the arms companies, at exactly the time when we're being told we are getting rid of the £20 uplift on universal credit, when we're breaking the triple lock for pensioners, and when we're making people pay more and more through national insurance in order to fund what should be funded through taxation, which is the National Health Service and a proper social care system. And these are a question of government priorities, and we have to challenge those priorities. And that's why I think it's so important that at the TUC we begin to link these issues, not just of domestic, but of foreign policy as well, because these are very much connected. And these aren't just wars that happen a long way away, they have a direct impact on us. It's already been mentioned, the scapegoating of people, the Islamophobia which has grown in the last 20 years, which is particularly targeted sections of the Muslim community, and which is something which is used to try to divide working people. That's one aspect of it. Another aspect of it is the attack on civil liberties, which Shami has just referred to with the police bill, but with all sorts of other things that have gone on over the last 20 years, making it harder to demonstrate, making it harder to have our voices heard. So I hope that this TUC will be a time when we can stand up over these issues, where we can say we need a different sort of foreign policy, and we need to put the money that's spent on wars, $2 trillion that the Americans spent on the Afghanistan war, should be spent on things that people really need, both in Afghanistan and here. So solidarity to everybody watching today, solidarity to all the delegates at the conference, and I would just like to say solidarity to all those organising the demonstration on October the 3rd in Manchester. I hope everybody who can will come and join us there, when we can send a real message to the Tory party at their conference that we're not going to accept these attacks anymore. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Lindsay. And as Lindsay's just said, something really big that we're building for right now is this opposition demo to a Tory party conference on the 3rd of October. So you will see much more information about that. And I know it's the strap line along the bottom of the screen right now. So it was the unions, the trade unions, that fought for safe working conditions for our members and service users throughout the pandemic. And somebody who's spent their entire life fighting for safe working conditions is our next speaker from the Fire Brigade Union, Matt Rack. Over to you, Matt.
Hi, Fran, brothers and sisters, comrades. Thanks for the invitation to speak here today. And some of the themes have already been touched on by other speakers. We're meeting again online because of the pandemic this week at Congress. And I think the pandemic has exposed, not just in Britain, but across the world, the huge inequalities that we see in our society. We see an utter failure of government, a failure to prepare, to plan, to provide adequate public services. We now see the economic impacts of the aftermath of the pandemic, as workers face threats to their jobs, to their pay. We face threats to our conditions through fire and rehire. Alongside the pandemic, of course, we have the ever-growing threat of the climate catastrophe. This summer, firefighters have been on the front line here in Britain, but primarily across Europe and in North America, with devastating wildfires, devastating floods, even in the richest and most powerful countries of the world, a threat that threatens our entire future. And as Lindsay has just touched on, of course, behind that, the appalling 20 years of war that we have seen, resulting in the creation, frankly, of a hell on earth for millions of people in the Middle East and in Afghanistan, a refugee crisis that we all face. And I hope that the trade union movement will stand in solidarity with refugees and defend their rights to be here in Britain when those refugee problems result very often from policy decisions made by our own government. I'm pleased that members of my union have been over to Calais supporting solidarity with refugees. And the war and foreign interventions highlight again the fact that when we're told there are no resources for pay, there are no resources for pensions, there are no resources for public services, that exposes completely what a lie that is. There are resources in this society, there are the resources in this world to provide jobs, homes and services for all. The trade unions need to be at the front of that struggle. The truth is, unfortunately, we've seen over the past year during the pandemic that the Labour Party has failed to deliver that challenge in Parliament, and therefore it does fall to the trade union movement to say that actually we need to assert and defend workers' interests, the interests of the vast majority of people. That's the task that falls to the trade union movement today. That's the task that falls to the TUC at this Congress this week. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Matt. That's great. Okay, our next speaker then is Kevin Courtney. Kevin is the General Secretary of the National Education Union, who've obviously been at the forefront of an awful lot just recently. So over to you, Kevin.
Thanks very much, Fran. Really pleased to be here at this People's Assembly online rally. Only wishing we were meeting in person and looking forward to being on that demonstration in Manchester and urging everyone here to be on that demonstration in Manchester. We have suffered an awful pandemic worldwide and in this country. It's an awful natural catastrophe, but one made so much worse by an ideological, incompetent government. An ideological, incompetent government which thought that public investment meant wasting billions on contracts for their mates to fail to run test, track and trace properly instead of building up local public health teams. An ideological, incompetent government which valued the economy over lives, refusing scientific advice to go into lockdown, ignoring scientific advice about circuit breaks, coming out too early, but with that ideological incompetence, damaging the economy as well as lives. And what we have to be worried about now is that extra damage which they've inflicted on our economy, that they will try and extract that price from us, from our children in schools. Our schools have had more closure time than most other European countries. That's because our class sizes are bigger, our rooms are our classrooms are more crowded than in other countries, and because they've ignored all of that advice. But our schools have closed for longer, and our government is investing far less in education recovery than the US, than the Netherlands, and not just our children, but the pay freeze that they are imposing on us this year, that they have every intention of carrying on into the future to pay for their mistakes. And we should say we should not pay for those mistakes. It's not the right way to get our economy moving again. Pounds spent in public sector pay packets get spent in private sector shops. So we have to challenge this pay freeze. And I do think that we have a chance, because something that's happened during this year is that members of unions have looked more to their unions. They've seen their unions protecting them, protecting their health and safety, at the same time that they've seen an incompetent government being careless about their health and safety. So I think that we have an opportunity. We have a bigger audience than we've had before. In my union, we have thousands more reps than we had before. We had to challenge the government in January when they wanted to open all schools. We challenged them then, and we can challenge them into the future. I want to see across the country groups of workers, public sector workers, agreeing to go and lobby their local MP. Let's make a campaign from below as well as on top. Let's say this pay freeze is not right for the country. We shouldn't pay the price of this incompetent government. Let's rally together. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Kevin, and I certainly echo those words. Members suffering because of the pay freeze that's been inflicted. Okay, our next speaker is from the Communication Workers Union. Very pleased to introduce Dave Ward. Over to you, Dave.
Thanks, Fran, and thanks for the opportunity to be part of this Eve of Congress rally. And I want to build on the themes that both Matt and Kevin have put forward. And it's really about building collectivism. It's about standing up now, up in the ante as a movement. And I think that is the fundamental question that trade unions are facing, and every single trade union rep faces, is, are we willing to bring together the strength that we show individually as trade unions to campaign and ultimately take action together in pursuit of a new deal for workers, for their families, and for the country. You know, I'm fed up, frankly, with talking about some of the things that we carry on talking about and not having that coming together of the movement. We know a few things at the moment are absolutely never going to change unless we stand up. One is this, is that the Tories, Johnson, they are never going to level up this country, because they will never, ever level out the power and wealth that they and their supporters hold. Never going to happen. Secondly, we also know that the Labour Party are not going to be able to deliver the change that we want. There's a truth to that, whether you support the Labour Party or whether you don't. that, you know, we've got to step up now. And the CW is putting a motion to this year's Congress that I would argue is the basis of a plan that everybody can get behind. I think we've got great trade union leaders. I think we've got great trade union activists. We've got a lot of fight in our movement. What we need to do, and what's been missing, is the plan that harnesses that fight. The CWU will be saying that we need to get out there. We need to plan for a rally in early spring 2022. I'm looking forward to being with the People's Assembly as well in Manchester, but I want the trade union movement to get out on the streets in spring 2022. But before that, I want us to be in those towns and cities, sharing platforms with some of the other great speakers that you've got on the programme today, in town hall style meetings, where we really do start to mobilise working people. I want us to agree shared industrial and political demands that capture all of the big disputes that are taking place at the moment. I want us to do that in a way where unions can pitch to their own members their key fights, but also connect it to the wider New Deal strategy. That's the challenge in front of us. We've got the power, we've got the influence. All we need to do is harness our strength. And I know you're all going to be up for that. And I look forward to being with you on the streets in Manchester as the start of that process. Thanks very much.
That's brilliant, Dave. Thank you so much, and echo so much of that. That's really powerful. Thank you. Okay, our next speaker, really pleased to introduce Sarah Woolley. Sarah is the General Secretary of the Bakers Union, and it's great to have you along with us this afternoon, Sarah. Over to you.
Thanks, Fran. And people are going to think I'm stalking Dave because I've just followed him on another meeting. Thank you for the invitation to join this fantastic platform. Never has there been a more critical time for us to come together and fight back. Bakers Food and Allied Workers Union members, like many others, have worked throughout the pandemic. And whilst it was great that they were recognised as the key workers we've always known them to be, going out day after day, producing the food that has kept the supermarket shelves filled, even when they've not been able to feed themselves and their families in some cases, hasn't really made them feel like key workers. I'm sure you can remember back when the public were encouraged to clap for our fantastic NHS and other key workers, and it was lovely for them to be appreciated. However, we know that claps don't pay the bills, and actually a minimum basic hourly rate of £15 an hour, decent sick pay and a ban on 0 hours contracts would be much more meaningful. In reality, being encouraged to go out and clap on a Thursday night was nothing more than a distraction technique to divert the public's attention away from the many failings of the Tories through the pandemic. A distraction also from the lack of challenge and accountability from the Labour Party leadership too. It really says it all when Marcus Rashford and trade unions have forced more U-turns than the opposition. Now furlough is coming to an end, alongside the removal of the £20 universal credit uplift. Added to that, the Tories' latest great ideas of increasing national insurance and suspending the pensions triple lock. It just proves for those who didn't already know, and let's be clear, there's a lot of the public that still see the Tories as a party that looks after them. It proves that they are only interested in their rich donors, their families and the 1%, and are intent on creating more division in our communities. The key workers they have spent months thanking with empty words are the very people that will be repeatedly hit with these changes and will be plunged further into poverty as a result, at a time when food bank is at its all-time highest and rising, and one in which those producing, selling and delivering food cannot feed themselves and their families. And it's shameful that this government is openly demonstrating its contempt for our class over and over again, and instead of focusing on challenging them, the party designed to represent working class people is too busy infighting and expelling people. If you're watching this and by any chance you're not in a trade union, join one. Organise your workplace and your community, because collectively we have the power to force change. We are the 99%, not Boris and his chums, and when we stand together and fight back, we are a force to be reckoned with. Join a trade union and let's work together across the many sectors we represent to grow our movement, improve the lives of our members and our class, and ensure that we've got a country worth living in going forward. Solidarity.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Sarah. That's brilliant. Okay, our next speaker probably doesn't need much introduction. Fantastic Labour MP, and hopefully will be again very soon, and a leading light in the People's Assembly too. So over to you, Laura Pidcock.
Hi, Fran. Thank you so much for that and for everything that you do. And thanks very much to every single person that has agreed to speak on this platform today at the People's Assembly rally before the TUC conference. I'm the National Secretary of the People's Assembly. And I suppose I want to set the scene slightly for this TUC rally and the conference that will come. And it isn't a pretty picture. There's 14.5 million people in poverty before the pandemic, 4.3 million children in poverty, 75% of those children in a household where at least one person works. 400,000 renting households have either been served an eviction notice or have been told they may be evicted. And 1 million renting households are worried about being evicted. 700,000 are already in arrears with their rent payments. And researchers have told us that more than 130,000 deaths in the UK since 2012 could have been prevented if not for austerity cuts. On top of that travesty, on top of that immeasurable injustice, tens of thousands of people who died didn't need to die, the words of Dominic Cummings, because of the handling of the pandemic by the Tories. And of course, on the long-term well-being of humanity, we know that the government's commitment to the capitalist system is placed above the capacity for us to inhabit this earth, with fires raging across the globe and floods engulfing communities all over the world. But the Tories have an 80-seat majority. They are introducing some of the most draconian legislation: the Police, Crime Courts and Sentencing Bill, the Borders and Nationalities Bill, the Election Bill. All threats to working class people through either a restriction on civil liberties, on the right to protest, on the bureaucratic barriers that they are adding to participations in elections. And the continued attack on working people could not be better characterised by the cut to the £20 uplift to universal credit and the national insurance hike. That uplift to universal credit, in my view, was an acknowledgement, and many others have written about this, that the social security system had been decimated and that people simply cannot live on what the state provides in circumstances of low pay, being out of work or not being able to work. And the hike in NI is asking lower earners to disproportionately pay with their wages to save the NHS and social care. And this is after long-term cuts to that. And it's shielding higher earners and completely obscuring the root causes of the crisis in social care, namely the mass privatisation of these services and the introduction of the private market and profit to a system which is about care. There are other options. We know that a wealth tax is just a start. There are 171 billionaires in the UK, 24 more than there were a year ago. So unimaginable wealth exists in a country whilst people are sick with worry about how they will feed their family. We know that there is a relationship between this excessive wealth and poverty, and it's namely the exploitation inherent in the capitalist system. Everything the Tories do is underpinned by their unwavering commitment to their ideology, that they are so deeply political in everything that they do. And the only way to counter their ruthlessness is with our politics, to exert our politics with absolute confidence and to organise, to galvanise our power as ruthlessly as they do. So I urge you, anyone watching, anyone on this call, please come to the Tory Party conference on Sunday, the 3rd of October. We have to be heard. We are enduring a sustained and intense attack on working class people, and there must be an opposition to that. You will be welcome at this huge demonstration in Manchester on Sunday, the 3rd of October. And not only that, around the 3rd of October, there will be, well, there is already planned a beautiful programme of events with speakers from across the movement. Our campaigns must unite to take on this government chair. And on the 3rd of October, that will happen. Thank you very much.
That's great. Thank you so much, Laura, and thanks for all the work that you do for the People's Assembly. Okay, so we all know that no force in society is better placed to oppose the Tories than the trade union movement, and we have to prioritise building workplace strength in individual unions and whilst maximising unity across the movement. And next up is somebody who is no stranger to fighting the cats and building that opposition. One of the driving forces in the People's Assembly as well. Really pleased to welcome Steve Turner, the Assistant General Secretary of Unite. Over to you, Steve.
Brilliant. Thanks very much for that, Fran, as always, and thanks to Ramona and the entire team behind the scenes that make all of these wonderful, wonderful gatherings possible. I just tuned in and listened to Laura and Sarah before, and they outlined some of the serious challenges that we've got at the moment. This is a really important time for us. It's a shame that the TUC Congress is once again online, of course. We could have done with a physical meeting. We need to get together and plan and plot and discuss and mobilise and organise against the threats that we face, the attacks on our class, and of course put forward real proposals to resolve those. But the reality is, even though we're at TUC this week, the challenges that we face are not going to be resolved simply by our movement alone. We need to mobilise in our communities, build those alliances with civil society, all of those campaigning organisations that the People's Assembly over the past 10 years and more have drawn together into the broadest possible alliance against not just austerity, but the attacks on our class that we've seen from the political class of whatever makeup a government may have been. So the TUC is important. It will set the scene this week about how our movement collectively is going to fight back, how we're going to protect our class, how we're going to fight for those things that Sarah quite rightly outlined, the £15 an hour minimum wage, the ending of 0 hours contracts, the ending of the fire and rehire attacks on our members that we've seen across our economy, providing decent sick pay entitlements to those that want to isolate but are forced into poverty as a result of doing so, and so turn off the app and don't isolate. You know, how are we going to address the attack on our industrial workplaces, our membership, as well as our class in our communities? So there is a whole Congress this week, and the core issues are going to be very much dealing with those issues, rebuilding that fairer economy post-COVID, the right to protest, of course, and the attack that we see at the moment making its way through Parliament to deny people the right to protest. And the best defence against that, the best protest against that is indeed to protest, to get on the streets in our communities and do exactly what it says on the tin. We're going to be discussing fire and rehire, of course. We're going to be discussing the climate crisis and how, as a movement, we make sure that there's a proper workers' transition to a fairer, more equal, greener economy. And a greener economy that creates millions of new, good, decent, well-paid, secure, unionised jobs with that new deal for working people that Dave Ward in the CWU, ourselves and so many others in our movement have been promoting. That we as a movement must take responsibility, not outsource our responsibility to political parties, to governments, to anybody else. We as a movement have to step up and organise and give confidence to working people to mobilise and to fight back as appropriate. The right to a home and the right to food, the fantastic campaign, again, that Sarah and the Bakers Union have been waging there. It's going to be an incredibly important debate at the TUC. Because all of those attacks are ongoing. We've got furlough ending. Others have mentioned it. We've still got 1.6 million people on furlough in our country. We've got a jobs crisis, or at least a decent jobs crisis. We've got the £20 increase to universal credit that the government is still adamant to remove at the end of September. That's over £1,000 a year being deprived from some of the most vulnerable people in our communities, and money that is directly spent in our communities, protecting others in work, spent on our high streets, not siphoned off to the nearest tax haven or simply pocketed away in some account somewhere. This is money that's spent. They get it in, they spend it, they create work, they support our communities with it. We've seen that national insurance hike, one of the worst ways in which you could raise money to support our NHS and social care service, with the poorest in society paying the burden, really, of a national insurance hike, when we should have been talking about a wealth tax. All of those billionaires that we've seen that Laura just outlined that the 24 more billionaires that we've got in our nation this year than we had last year. People making millions and millions and millions of pounds from people's ill health. We've got the public service wage cap, the 3% to the NHS. All of these attacks, the housing crisis, food bank use, all of this is still ongoing. But if we want that fairer, greener, more equal society, we're going to have to organise, we're going to have to mobilise, and we're going to have to fight for it. So if you're not in a People's Assembly group, then join one. If you haven't got one in your community, form one. As Sarah rightly said, if you're not in a union and you're tuning into this, make sure you join your union, but not so that someone can come over the hill as a saviour. Join a union to be part of your union, to own your union, to form a power base in your workplace, collectively with work colleagues, to fight back and make sure that your interests are protected at work and in society. And the People's Assembly is core to all of this. So we will be at Labour conference. Whatever your politics are on this call, we'll be at Labour conference, and we'll be having a beach party, and we'll be sharing the stage with the FBU and their tender unit to make sure that we've got a huge rally at the opening of Labour conference. We will be in Manchester for the Tory conference, so a big plug for that. Let's get organised. Let's build for that demo on the 3rd of October to expose the catalogue of failures that the Tory party are responsible for, not just during the course of COVID, but throughout their history in attacking ordinary working people, our class and our communities. And there's a whole week of events in Piccadilly Gardens up in Manchester that are being organised by the Manchester People's Assembly, Ramona and the national team, and all of those other groups that are coming together. So if you're not planning to go, put it in your diary. If you're talking to others, make sure that they've got it in their diary. Make arrangements now. Get meetings going in your communities now to build for that demonstration on the 3rd and that week of activities in Manchester. This is our history that we're building now. Nobody's going to build it for us. Nobody's going to fight back for our class unless we stand up and fight back for our class. So whatever you're doing, get organised, get active, mobilise, be confident, and get on the streets. Solidarity, Fran. Solidarity, comrades.
Thanks very much, Steve, and a real call to arms there on behalf of the People's Assembly. So thank you so much for that. Okay, our next speaker on behalf of United for Black Lives is Marvina Newton. And if you haven't heard Marvina speak before, you won't forget it in a hurry. So over to you, Marvina.
Thank you so much. It's such a powerful place to be in right now. Our voices are being united in everything we do. We are speaking from one tone, and we are saying this government is not fit for purpose. We're asking everybody to come together, use your voice and influence, and unite against this government. And until we can show them the people united will never be defeated, irregardless of our class, sex, religion, race, and identity. We're part of one human race, and that race is the one that deserves to be able to have a voice against this government. The Police and Crime Sentencing Bill is coming to fruition, but we as the people are able to challenge this government, and we can do that by uniting and working and finding ways to join the People's Assembly, join your trade unions, and speaking to all those who are from marginalized and disadvantaged community or ethnic minority community. Your voice is so important. Your face is so important, your representation. And it's not in a tokenistic way. It's in a way to actually drive change. You can be part of the change you're creating, a legacy, but your silence is consent.
Okay.
And in solidarity. We're going to stand in solidarity. Oh, did I disappear?
Just for a second you froze, but you're back.
Oh gosh, no. So what are we going to do? We're going to stand in solidarity. We're going to make sure we use our voice to amplify those who are not able to use their voices. We're going to find a way to join our trade unions. We're going to find a way to volunteer, pick either it's the Kill the Bill teams, if you want to join the People's Assembly organizing groups, if you want to join even the volunteering with one of your trade unions, please do something. because when we are united against this corrupt government who are complicit, they are a gang mentality. They are the modern day mob mentality that are getting away with institutional racism, ending our provision to healthcare, making sure our children are not being able to get the standard they deserve. We want to stop the privatization of our NHS. As an ex-NHS worker, I know how important for us to get those pay rise. We can do this through the People's Assembly, through the trade unions. And I want to say well done to Ramona, to Laura, to Fran, to all the amazing people behind the scene who constantly work to amplify the voice and influence of our communities. And I can't wait to see you in October the 3rd in front of the Tory conference. Come with your pans, come with your loud presence. Let's let them know that they're not fit for government. And then when we go to Labour on the beach in Brighton, we're standing, we're holding, and we're showing that we are stronger. There is more of us united than they can imagine.
Thanks so much for Marvina. That's fantastic. Thank you for that. Okay, we all know that the attacks on workers' conditions and rights will intensify. We know there's cuts, there's privatisation on the agenda, low wages. But one of the most unpalatable things that's come about just recently has been a real tranche of fire and rehire policies from a number of employers. And somebody who's been at the forefront of challenging all of that is our next speaker, MP Barry Gardner. So Barry, really pleased to have you along here.
Fran, thanks so much. 3 little words. Not I love you. Okay, although of course I do love the People's Assembly, right? You know, I do love the Trade Union Congress. 3 little words. You are fired. You go into work and you're told you're fired, but don't worry, come back in tomorrow, sign a new contract, take £12,000 off your pay, lose your pension rights. That's what fire and rehire means. And that's why when Steve and others were talking about the importance of the trades union movement really never having been so important, it's about how we fight back against that inequality in the workplace. Because they can unilaterally, the bosses can unilaterally tear up that contract with you and force you to sign a new contract. And the way that we need to fight against that is by rolling back all the anti-trade union laws that previous governments have put in place. We go right back 30, 40 years and see it. And the bill that I've got coming before Parliament is the beginning of that fight back, I hope. Because what it'll begin to do is to redress the balance in the workplace. It will actually put duties on the employers. Because at the moment, if a trade union wants to take action to represent its workforce in that situation, because of the legislation, it takes about 6 weeks to get the ballot, get the strike action. And by that time, often it's too late because people are got in there and they're got in there one by one and they're told by their manager, oh, well, you know, you've got family to think about. You've got children, haven't you? Don't you think it would be better to have a job? Sign the new contract. At least you'll have a job. And that's the pressure that they put on. That's the bullying. That's the harassment. And that's why we've got to fight it. But we don't fight this simply by going out in the streets and yelling about it. We've got to fight it smart because it's a private member's bill. I can't win a private member's bill in Parliament by making some great rhetorical speech. You can win it by writing to your MP, your Tory MP. Don't bother with the Labour ones, they're all on board. But write to your Tory MPs. Write, if you've got a Labour MP, write to Boris Johnson, write to Kwasi Kwarteng. Tell them how you feel about this. Tell them why you think it sucks. And actually, the way we will get change is only if the government comes on board and begins. They say that it's unacceptable. They say it's bully boy tactics, but they're not prepared to legislate. They simply say, oh, well, we'll change the guidelines. Guidelines are no use because the employers know what they're doing is morally wrong. So guidelines aren't going to make any difference to that. only legislation will stop those employers from saying those three little words. You are fired. So I've got three little words. Fight back now. Another three, write those letters. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Barry. Really, really important points being made there, and something as a movement we really need to take on board. So thank you so much for that. Okay, our next speaker comes all the way from the People's Assembly in Durham. Over to you, Molly Brown.
Hi everybody. Well done all the speakers before me, and thank you for inviting me to come and speak today. I think it's safe to assume that if you were to walk around the towns and cities, that you would think the pandemic was over, that we're all going about with business as usual, except for the odd mask wearer and the hand sanitizer in a shop doorway that, let's be honest, is often empty now. There isn't much around to suggest that we're still in a global pandemic. But if you listen to the exhausted NHS workers, look at the hospital figures, the death figures, we know that they tell a completely different story. The number of COVID infections are significantly worse than this time last year. NHS workers are becoming so overwhelmed that there's already whispers of another lockdown in October. Yet at the same time, the government are telling workers to get back to normal with little or no restrictions in the workplace. And of course, we all know that there could have been loads of steps taken to avoid this happening again. At the same time, as has been mentioned, they're plowing ahead with the end of furlough, cutting back on the £20 uplift on universal credit, as well as the introduction of the national insurance increase. As we know, this is going to hugely impact workers and plunge those already worse off in even deeper poverty, as Laura mentioned earlier. But not only that, it also takes a huge chunk from already struggling local economies that have suffered years upon years of austerity and cuts. We are seeing, it has been out there that there's been an increase in pay in some sectors, but this is because they're desperate to get workers back into the workplace. And of course, we do have the crisis of the long-term impact of COVID looming on both mental and physical health. People are terrified to leave the house in fear of getting COVID, and we need to be asking, where are the support mechanisms or funding put in place for these workers? Where is the funding for extra mental health provision? They do assume that they can just wave a little bit of money to get people back into work, but people are scared. But they're also wise to what's going on around them, and they've seen how so-called key workers have been treated and disregarded during the crisis, and are rightly now trying to put their health and their own families first. What workers need is, of course, more money, we know that, but with that they need added security and protection in the workplace, reassurance that the health and safety will be paramount to the companies that they're going out to work for. And we must be relentless in demanding this. It's a vital role that we, the workers, the trade union and the labour movement must play in the recovery from the pandemic and as part of the unemployment fight back. We need to make sure that people join trade unions, but become active in them as well. Ask trade unions to support local strike maps and show solidarity at all times, support the NHS, support and widen the Unite Communities campaign on the universal credit cut, work together with local trade councils and People's Assembly groups, establish local grassroots campaigns, support the extension of furlough, support housing unions, and also, as people have mentioned, make sure that you're at the National People's Assembly Tory Party conference protest in Manchester on the 3rd of October. We do all need to come together in all our strength and in unity to fight off the Tory onslaught of deeper austerity on the working classes. And there's no better time or place to do this. I'm just going to quickly finish on this. I'm sat here today, people are probably thinking she could have got changed out of her running gear. I haven't been running yet, but the chances are far higher of me going out running today if I'm ready to do that. And we must have that mindset of activists. We must carry materials and leaflets everywhere we go. Information sheets, leave them wherever you go. Always be ready to have that conversation wherever you are, whatever you're doing, and seize every opportunity and be ready for the fight back. Thank you.
Thanks, Molly. Thanks so much, and I hope you get your run. Okay, our next speaker has, it's really important when we're talking about all of the struggles we face to be talking about how we build the activity from the ground up, from every level of activity. And Holly has just become a GMB officer. She's involved in organising in the National Health Service, which we know is creaking under enormous pressure, and that the workers there are being rewarded with very little in terms of pay increase. So Holly, we're really keen to hear from you. Over to you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I've had some tech issues, so I'm on my phone, so I hope it works okay. Yeah, thanks for the introduction. Yeah, I'm an NHS nurse and newly appointed GMB officer, and also the founder of NHS Work Now, which is a collective of NHS workers from all across the UK who we've been fighting for our pay and safety, and not just for ourselves, but our patients and our communities. And we've all been doing this whilst working in frontline clinical roles throughout the pandemic, which, to say the least, has been a real challenge. But mobilising and organising and pushing that engagement in the trade union movement is what we need to be doing to win. Now, NHS workers are currently in a fight for their pay. We're demanding a restorative 15% pay increase, and this must be fully funded by the government. We know we've been offered an insulting 3%, which just represents further pay restraint for us all. And not only that, but ministers are forcing NHS England to foot the bill. And that's at a time when we're battling against impossible backlog and dealing with recruitment and retention crisis. And it's disgraceful that NHS services are having to divert money from providing care to foot a bill and cover a cost that's normally borne by the Treasury. So at the moment, our trade unions are balloting for pay on the 3% pay award. So NHS workers watching this, please find that ballot, return it, vote reject. We need to be fighting back on this. It's clear that our government has no intention in investing in NHS staff or protecting the future of our health service. Privatisation is happening now, as we know. And pay is one of the levers for this. And now we've also seen a rise in our national insurance, which makes the pay award worth even less. Adding the rate of inflation, we've just simply got another year of cuts. Now, health and social care should be government funded, and we should be taxing the rich who have profited off the back of the pandemic, not increasing tax for some of the lowest paid workers in the country, who we know have literally risked theirs and their families' lives for the past year to keep this country going. Now, we know this government don't listen to us, arguably, because they just don't care, and they've got other plans for the health service, which has been clearly demonstrated in the new health and care bill. So I just want to mention that briefly. The threat within that bill of more powers being offered to the health secretary should terrify us all. There's talk of diluting our skill mixes, down-regulating professional bodies. There's no move to bring contracts in-house, which just leaves outsourced colleagues who are on lower rates of pay and worse terms and conditions, just really, really vulnerable. And there's nothing in that bill which is going to address the real problems in the NHS. So we must all be united in opposing this and supporting workers in the fight for their pay. So I just want to finally say, as all the other speakers have said, it's desperately important we unite across the labour movement, support these grassroots organisations, mobilise, organise, fight for the future to protect our frontline workers, support the vulnerable in society, and most important, everybody, if you're not a member, join a trade union. We need them now more than ever. And thank you and solidarity, and I'll see you all in Manchester.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Holly. And whilst you're speaking, Richard posted, we need the mother of all protests on behalf of the National Health Service. And ain't that the truth? I think we all know the campaign that you're fighting really is for the future of the NHS. Okay, our final speaker probably needs a little introduction. Ken Loach, filmmaker and activist. I first met Ken when they were preparing for the film I, Daniel Blake. Obviously, my role within PCS, we had quite a number of discussions. I'm really proud, Ken, that you were able to come along and join us today. So over to you.
Thanks very much, Fran. It's a real privilege to be asked to speak, say a few words in such exalted company, people so active in the union movement. But I want to ask a difficult question that I'm afraid has been hanging over everything that's been said. How are we going to make these changes? It's been spelled out absolutely clearly and passionately, the suffering and the hardship and the insecurity that people have at work and through being excluded from work. How are we going to make the changes we need to make? We need a political instrument. What is that political instrument? Now, I think we know, everyone here knows, that Starmer will not produce this. Starmer will not make the changes you have all been talking about. Take, for example, the NHS. We've been through the pandemic, or in the middle of the pandemic still. Previously, Labour was committed to ending the privatisation of the NHS. No mention of that. No mention of that. Privatisation brings outsourcing, subcontracting. That means insecurity, because how do they get the contracts? By cutting labour costs. That means 0 hours contracts. That means so-called self-employed. It means insecurity at work. That isn't going to change. We have no indication that that will change. And I think, remember, John McDonnell promised trade union rights from day one at work. That's gone. That's not on the agenda now. We know the purges indicated that the most active activists, the most committed activists, the most principled people in the party are leaving, being driven out or excluded. Up to 150,000, maybe 200,000 are now without a political home. That's the engine that can bring these changes. And to bring us together, to avoid the fragmentation, to stop people just walking away from politics saying, oh, to hell with it, there's no hope. We need leadership. Where is that leadership to come? Where is it to come from? And I think this is the time now when the unions must step up. And they have a choice. Can they transform the Labour Party now to be the party that will make these changes? And I saw Barry is a good friend and he's been supportive of me. But I have to say, writing a letter to a Tory MP won't do it. Because that anti-trade union law is a piece of class legislation, and it's the ruling class, it's the class that wants that legislation that the Tories represent. And Starmer and the Labour Party is now the central block to our making these changes. So we have a choice. Do we transform the Labour Party? Is that possible? If so, what is the path? Will the unions pull the plug on Starmer and say, sorry, you don't represent us, you don't represent our interests, we're not supporting you, the Labour Party has to change? Is that the way? Or does there have to be a new political presence altogether? And I don't know what that is or how it could be. But without that union strength, without the clout and the financial importance that unions have, how do we move forward? And this is a big question, and it lies behind everything that's been said. Matrak made the point, and very clearly, but we've got to push it further. What is the practical way forward to make the political changes we all need? And it hasn't been answered, and it needs to be answered this week, because the time is running short now. The climate emergency shows we don't have time to wait another decade, another generation. The enemy is at the gates now. And I want to finish with a quote from Nye Bevan. And he wrote this: the trade union leaders forged a revolutionary weapon without having a revolutionary intent. Well, sorry, folks, you have to now make a choice. How are we going to use our strength? How are we going to make the changes? Because time is running out. Where's the revolutionary intent? Solidarity.
Thanks so much, Ken, and really important words there, and really important that we all take on board the enormity of the struggle that we're facing. So this afternoon we've heard some fantastic speakers, and I really hope that that's geared us up for the debates this week at the TUC. But as a number of speakers have indicated, it has to be about more than fine speeches. So let's take that willingness to fight into our unions, into our communities, into society, and let's join together to make clear to the Tories that they won't get away with the plans that we're facing. Let's build a movement capable of defeating the cuts and the attacks. And to do that, we need to work together to address Ken's question: how do we build a movement able to fight back? And I would suggest that the best way to do that is by working together, by joining our struggles wherever that's possible, by campaigning together, and by ensuring that we are the biggest opposition possible, that we build the biggest opposition possible to what this government is trying to do. And in the absence of any other alternative, that we make sure we are the alternative and we articulate that. So thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. Thanks for coming along. Solidarity to everybody for the week ahead. I hope we have a really successful TUC for those who are delegates, and to all of you, I hope to see you on the 3rd of October in Manchester. Look forward to it. Thank you very much for joining. Take care. Stay safe. Bye.